Hello, and welcome to the APICS webinar, Beyond the Horizon, Strategic Supply Chain Imperatives for Future Supply Chain Professionals, with Judy Whipple and Tom Glazer. My name is Jennifer Storelli, Associate Editor at APICS. Please note this presentation is being recorded and will be available at apics.org/online events starting early next week. Before we begin, I'd like to run through a few details. At the end of the presentation, we will save time for a question and answer session. If you look at the right toolbar on your screen, you'll see a questions box. To ask your question at any time during the presentation, simply type it in the box and click Send. Should you experience any technical difficulties during today's broadcast, please call GoToWebinar Tech Support at 1-805-617-7000. Again, that's 1-805-617-7000. And now it's a pleasure to introduce our presenters for today.
Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar. We appreciate you joining us today where we'll be discussing some research from the Supply Chain Management Beyond the Horizon project. And in particular, we'll be talking about strategic supply chain imperatives. My name is Judy Whipple, and I'm a professor of supply chain management at the Broad College of Business at Michigan State University, and I'm happy to participate in this webinar today. The webinar today will start with a brief overview of the Supply Chain Management Beyond the Horizon research project, and then we'll move into initial findings focused on 3 of the main strategic initiatives that firms who participated in the research discussed. And these will be followed by in-depth examples from VF Corporation and the initiatives that they're undertaking in each of these areas. And we'll conclude with a Q&A session at the end. A team of faculty members in the Department of Supply Chain Management and the Broad College of Business at Michigan State University have been investigating what's on the minds of supply chain executives across global firms. The research team sought to understand how supply chains remain competitive today, but also in the future. The project, Beyond the Horizons, is funded through APICS, the leading association for supply chain and operations management professionals, and MSU's McConnell Chair in Business Administration. The research team conducted in-depth interviews with executives from 50 firms in North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia. These firms included manufacturers, retailers, and service providers. The in-depth interviews focused on various factors, including the strategic initiatives being undertaken, as well as the capabilities that firms were focused on developing in order to solve today's challenges and take advantage of tomorrow's opportunities. The 9 individuals here made up the MSU research team. And now I would like to introduce my co-presenter for this webinar, Tom Glazer. Tom?
Good afternoon all, and thank you, Judy. Great to be with you here today. My name is Tom Glazer. I'm the president of the supply chain and a vice president of VF Corporation. VF has a pretty broad supply chain. My team looks after all of the demand planning, the supply planning, the raw material procurement, the manufacturing, the sourcing, the logistics move, and the customer service. And I look forward to discussing today some of the initiatives and strategies that we're working on. A little bit about VF Corporation. You'll see on this slide some of our key brands, like the North Face, Vans, Timberland, Wrangler, and Lee. We're one of the world's largest apparel companies and a very large footwear company. Many people don't know the VF name. We don't trade under this name, but many people know our brands. More on VF Corporation. We're a Fortune 248 company. We were organized in 1899, making us over 116 years old. We have 64,000 associates around the world. About 30,000 of those associates are in our supply chain. In addition to being in the United States, we have large footprints in Mexico and Central America, a large footprint in Asia. And our revenue is about $12.5 billion, and we look to grow about 6 to 8% per year.
Thank you, Tom. As part of the interview process, we asked participants to discuss 1 to 3 major strategic initiatives that were being undertaken by their firms that were involving and affecting supply chain management. The data from the interviews was content analyzed, and the results of the analysis showed a variety of different initiatives. The 3 initiatives listed here, supporting new growth, new relationship approaches, and new fulfillment models, were frequently discussed by the majority of participants. We're going to look at each of these individually. I'll be giving you some additional findings on each initiative from the research, and then Tom will share how BF is responding to these initiatives as well. Participating firms discussed various aspects of supporting and managing new growth. In some cases, this growth was organic and involved innovation through product and service diversification. In other cases, this growth was through M&A activity. Many of the firms experienced growth as industries were rebounding from the recession. Further, other firms were seeking diversification on a global scale by moving to new markets, new regions, including emerging economies. As part of the initiatives for supporting new growth, companies were frequently talking about that global diversification and how to try to manage it and how it was changing their supply chains, as well as how new growth was highlighting potential risks and how they could manage those risks more effectively. I'd like to share some of the examples from the interviews with quotes talking about how companies were looking at this global diversification. In this first example, the company was expanding their reach to go international, in part because of just the sheer population size outside the U.S. And so I like to quote, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure out that's where business is going to have to be moving. Moving globally does present some different challenges, though, for companies. In this example, the company talked about how they had been selling globally through their web store, but their initial model basically presented products in English. Consumers had to pay in US dollars and with a US only payment method. And so part of this firm's global diversification was to create localized online carts so that they could do business in the local currency, local language for Europe and Asia, and localized payment methods. This firm really had to think about a new go-to-market strategy in order to make this happen. And their go-to-market strategy involved 3PL partners who could help them fulfill that local demand, not only in terms of better delivery, but also in a more cost-effective manner. Global diversification, as discussed by many of the participants, often requires new and significant supplier development processes. As this quote indicates, part of this company's growth agenda was primarily growing their business geographically. So when they were looking to grow in China and India and other parts of the globe, they really had to think about how they could leverage the existing supplier relationships they had, as well as create a consistent supplier qualification process if they needed to find new suppliers in these areas. In another example, this company was focused on Africa and talked a lot about the challenges of moving to an emerging market. This created a lot of focus where they had to rely on third-party suppliers in Africa because the supply chain activities were so much different. And that required different supply chain infrastructure, different ways of working, and really helped them through, by working with third parties, to really talk about moving from poor customer service, which they were providing when they initially entered the market, to now more of a perfect order, given the partnerships that they had developed. Many of the firms in the research study discussed the importance of creating strong risk management initiatives. This meant not only finding the right suppliers and properly qualifying those suppliers, but also understanding the various risks that could occur around the globe. Many firms also incorporated as part of their risk management initiatives to improve sustainability and enhance corporate social responsibility. One firm in the study created a risk register that was specifically being used in their procurement group. In this case, the company recognized that they were only as strong as the weakest link in their supply chain. And so the first part of the risk registry was to map out the supply base to understand where those weak links were. That meant not only understanding where your first tier suppliers were, but understanding second, third, and for example, beyond tiers to really understand where those weak links were. Once that mapping was done, then the firm developed mitigation plans for each of those various risks. Another example, the executive talked about how they had really changed their thought about risk as a reaction. In other words, how quickly can we respond to an event once it happens, but now focus more on risk proactively. And they looked at risk differently, whether the product was single-sourced or dual-sourced. In single sourcing, one of the things they started doing a more detailed assessment on, in addition to where that source was located and what technology they were using, but they started to focus more intentionally on assessing continued financial viability of that single source supplier. An example of proactive approach for dual or multi-sourced options is understanding where those suppliers were located. And in many cases, they had thought that the dual sourcing strategy itself was a risk mitigation strategy, but they found in many cases those 2 or 3 suppliers were located within miles of each other. So they recognized that the dual sourcing was not going to prevent a potential problem if there was a weather event or political event, because those suppliers were so closely located to each other. Tom is now going to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about strategies that VF has been undertaking to support their new growth. Tom, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thanks, Judy. Picking up your theme of global diversification, as you can see from this slide, VF has a very diverse sourcing footprint. We've grown over the last number of years. In fact, we've grown 43% over the last 5 years or so. We source and produce in many different countries. As you can see, we source in Asia and the Americas. A little bit different from many of our peer group companies. We have a very strong footprint in the Americas. We source predominantly in Mexico, but also in most Central American countries. In those countries, we have our own manufacturing footprint. We think that's very important to us because it comes to diversification. Not only do we have a big sourcing footprint, but we also have our own manufacturing footprint. One of the things that's going on in our industry over the last number of years is that the situation and moving out of China, repositioning ourselves out of China. For many years, our industry went to China, but as China's economy has grown and as the expenses have changed, we've begun to reposition out of China. Still a very important country for us, and we will continue to source in China, but more for Asia and China for China. But we've been growing in places like Vietnam, Mexico, and Bangladesh. We think this global diversity is really critical for us. When we look at business continuity, and then we look at our overall footprint, generally this gives us a pretty good security of supply. So between our own manufacturing and sourcing being a balance and being in very different countries, we feel that this global diversity gives us great business continuity and security. Adding on to our global diversification is our manufacturing footprint. Currently, VF has 30 plants throughout the world. As I mentioned before, predominantly in Central America, and many of those plants are in Mexico, which we consider to be pretty much domestic, given the logistics of being able to ship into the United States. Although our percent is slightly down over the years, we've actually grown the total number of units and actually grown the total amount of dollars that we produce. We've just grown our sourcing footprint faster. Again, we think that having our own manufacturing offers us a great advantage and gives us security of supply, because in manufacturing ourselves, we understand how goods are produced. In many cases, we have a very strong engineering team which we deploy throughout the world, and we share between our sourcing footprint and our manufacturing footprint. And fundamentally, when you really look at it, I believe we're the only large, diverse, global lifestyle apparel company that has maintained its apparel manufacturing and footwear manufacturing. And I believe this gives us a strong strategic advantage in understanding all that hard skills make and the need for engineering in order to produce high-quality products on time. Judy talked about risk management, and one of the key areas of risk management in the apparel and footwear field is worker safety. As you may recall, a number of years ago, 2-3 years ago, there was a terrible disaster in Bangladesh in Rana Plaza. And although VF was not at all involved with that, we are a big player in Bangladesh. Since then, we've mobilized to improve and even get better than we were before. We've joined the Alliance for Worker Safety in Bangladesh and have been a key member there. And then about 18 months ago, we launched our responsible sourcing playbook, in which we've deployed much more assets into the field to improve the working conditions of workers. We've actually hired a VP of responsible sourcing. And one of the things we're doing is doubling down and reviewing all of the plants where we do business, internally and externally, to make sure that they're safe for fire, safe for building structure, and we treat workers the right way. We've added on to that by making sure that the products that are made in those plants are made with chemicals that are safe for the workers and safe for our consumers. And that's what we call our product stewardship and raw materials traceability work. And in that we have a program called ChemIQ, in which we test all the chemistry that goes on in these facilities to make sure that they're safe for the workers and the environment. We've also connected with our corporate sustainability group to make sure we're using less water and less energy. In some cases, that's rather simple, where we're just insulating pipes, etc. In some cases, we're working on new technology like reverse osmosis to recycle water in our wash plants. And finally, we're trying to reach out in the communities where we do business with. This idea is called sustainable living environments. That might be helping a school or building a well or helping with a medical clinic. We think this responsible sourcing playbook helps the people in the communities where we work, makes our workers much safer, and we look forward to helping this industry get better in the years to come.
The next key initiative involved new approaches to relationships, in particular relationships with the firm's suppliers. And the companies that participated in the research discussed this new relationship approaches really from two different perspectives. First, companies talked about really rethinking the value that suppliers provide to the firm and the impact that suppliers have. Traditionally, value has been thought of as coming predominantly from delivering cost reductions. Certainly, costs will always be an important consideration for buying firms, but the firms in the research talked about how value extends much farther beyond just cost. Value can also come from partnering with suppliers to create innovative products and services that can differentiate both firms in the marketplace. The second aspect of new relationships was discussed by firms, particularly firms that face some type of constraint in their supply market. Sometimes this constraint could be transportation capacity, could be material or component shortages, or it could be that only a few suppliers have the unique capabilities that the buying firm is seeking. In these cases, firms talked about how it's important to recognize that suppliers have choices with respect to who they want to partner with. And this means that the buying firms need to understand how to become a customer of choice. As part of understanding value, it's critical for firms to understand their supply base and develop different strategies for managing different supplier segments. While some segments can be approached with a leverage strategy that focuses predominantly on cost reduction and cost containment, other segments must be considered for long-term value and strategic impact. I think the quotes I'm about to show you can help illustrate how the companies that we talk to are rethinking their supplier value. In this first quote, the company was repositioning itself towards more partnerships with their suppliers, and in particular, supplier involvement earlier in the design process. And the executive we spoke to talked about how they were really rethinking how they could fully leverage their supply base. Now, leverage to them did not mean that cost reduction, cost containment piece. Instead, it meant leveraging supplier expertise. So their primary focus was on improving quality and reducing lead time by getting suppliers involved in the process earlier. The secondary focus for this company was price and cost. Another quote talked about the recognition that buying standardized parts from our suppliers, who our competitors are buying from as well, would not differentiate this company's products from its competitors. So the executive in this firm was really focused on, again, that understanding how to bring innovation co-created with the supply base to the marketplace to gain a competitive advantage. The final quote, we focused on trying to develop and think in the future where the growth of the business was going to be. And so this company was really thinking about where's our business growing, what is going to be happening to the technology of our products, and how do we think more strategically of that co-creation with the supplier. Creating impact really focuses on how a firm can partner with its key suppliers to develop new value, greater impact, and achieve a competitive advantage. And based on the discussion, again, companies were looking at how to drive innovation. And in this example, they really said, our new focus is to give consumers the innovation they want. So this company was looking at new suppliers. It was looking at improving relationships with existing suppliers, but it was really focused on co-creating to together bring innovation to the market. So it was important for this firm to ensure that the strategy that the firm was taking matched the procurement process. And if the strategy was on innovation, the procurement process could not be solely focused on cost reduction. So they had to really rethink how they selected suppliers so that they could move forward on that innovation strategy. In another example, he said, the executive said, we were looking for low-cost suppliers, but they finally realized that all that gave them was low-cost things. And when they focused instead of just on low cost, when they started to focus instead on supplier capability, they rethought their sourcing strategy. Now they started looking for suppliers that had expertise where this firm didn't, and really focused on how to create future value by understanding what the supplier's capabilities are today and what capabilities they're going to need in the future. And this really coincides with the supporting new growth, because companies talked about how that future value has to be thought about around the globe, because in different markets they're going to need different values, and what the suppliers, their current suppliers or suppliers in their market, they really needed to understand the capabilities that existed. This is particularly important for firms that may have a 12 to 18 month pre-qualification process. And so if they're not part of, if procurement is not part of the discussion on strategy, what new products are we going to be going to market with, what new markets are we going to be entering, if they're not involved in that discussion 24 months and more out, they're going to be challenged to create and pre-qualify a supply base that can help achieve that strategy. Earning preferential treatment became another way that firms were approaching how to deal with and manage relationships in a new way. We've long understood that consumers vote with their wallets. They make decisions of who they want to buy from and who they don't want to buy from. Companies that we talk to are recognizing that suppliers also have choices, particularly when faced with limited capacity issues, whether that's transportation or material capacity or limited supplier expertise. Suppliers have choices of who they do and don't want to do business with. Given that suppliers have choices, it's important for firms to recognize whether they're the big gorilla in the room or the trusted partner. And if they're not the trusted partner, how do they become that trusted partner so that they are the customer of choice for their supply base? In this example, this particular company would talk with their suppliers and say, am I your best customer? It was important for them to be the best customer because this was a small customer who was competing for expertise and capacity against much larger customers. But this customer knew that they were easy to do business with, they were fair, they paid bills on time, and they looked for win-win opportunities. In this case, many of their suppliers were identifying new innovations, and they were not able to sell those innovations to the large customers until they were proven beyond just an idea or a prototype. And so this particular small customer said to some of those suppliers, hey, we'll allow you to test your new products with our product. And so even though they were a small player, they not only treated those suppliers very fairly, but they also allowed those suppliers the chance to test that innovation with them. And this became a great way to partner with their supply base and become a customer of choice. This other example, I think, really highlights going back to the previous slides on understanding value and impact. In this case, this company understood that if they were going to just beat suppliers up on price and performance, that wasn't really going to be a way to earn preferential treatment from them. And so this executive talked about the philosophy of if we treat them like partners, they're going to feel more like partners. Some of the things that companies talked about doing as part of a way to earn preferential treatment is to really be much more open and transparent with their suppliers and talk with them maybe through quarterly meetings, annual supplier councils, where they not only shared information about their firm's strategic plans, but they also asked for feedback from their supply base. What can we do to make life easier for you? What can we do to earn your trust? What can we do to be a better customer to you? And that really came out in terms of ways to increase visibility to help the businesses run smoother and the relationship improve. And now Tom will share with you the different approaches that VF has been taking.
Strategic vendor partnerships are very critical for VF Corporation. As you can see from this slide, some of our suppliers are very substantial in volume for us, in some cases up to almost $400 million. We try to work with our suppliers to be their customer of choice. In many cases, we'll take over an entire plant and collaborate with them. In almost every case, we have engineers on big key suppliers like that. We have engineers, we work with them in the plant. We work with them collaboratively on product development issues. We work with them and listen to them about how we can procure raw materials together. We work with them to try to understand the financial situation. In many cases, as I talked about on our responsible sourcing playbook, we work with them on how we can improve the labor relations within their plant using different HR techniques. And we work with them on financial arrangements to make sure that they're being paid efficiently and effectively and that their balance sheet is strong. And we believe that this partnership has really helped us become a much stronger supply chain. And one of the things we've tried to do is also make our most important suppliers more important by consolidating our vendor base. In the case of Asia here, 30 suppliers make up 65% of our volume. We believe when we have a deeper, richer relationship with our suppliers, we become more important to them. They become more important to us. In some cases, we've been doing business in cases for 20 and 25 years. These relationships not only spread into the manufacturing plants on what we do for the cut and sew, which we say in our industry of the final assembly, but step back into the fabric and the trim suppliers, and we have long, rich relationships which are very critical to VF. One of the things we've been working on over the last number of years is how do we improve our supplier relationships? And we've come up with this handle called the third way. So let me explain a little further. The first way would be our own manufacturing, which I already explained, and we have 30 some odd plants and we make well over 100 million units in our own facilities. And we think we have some of the best-in-class manufacturing in both apparel and footwear. On the other side of the equation, as you can see from the slide, is transactional sourcing. And in our industry, that's also very important, where basically you put together a package and you go out into the marketplace and then you bid and auction and try to get the best price you can. And certainly in some cases that's very important, particularly when it's non-strategic. But we've been thinking for years about what would be the best way to be, not necessarily own the facility, but perhaps run it like we would run it. And so we've come up with this third way concept, which sits in the middle between transactional sourcing and owned manufacturing. These have become very important strategic partners for us. In some cases, we'll take over the entire plant. In some cases, we'll be engaged with them on the finances of the particular facility. In every case, we have engineers in the facility. And in most cases, we're very deeply involved in how we work with the labor in that facility. We have many different shades of this. And in terms of these relationships, we call them light, medium, and heavy, depending on the engagement that we need. But again, in most cases, we're either collaboratively running the plant or deeply engaged. And we think in the long run that we would like to get to the point where 80% of our products are made either in our own facilities or in plants like Third Way, which act like our own facilities. And I think we give our partners a great advantage here and give them great financial stability.
The final initiative that we would like to discuss is creating new fulfillment models. With changing technologies, with increasing consumer expectations, with global opportunities, many firms are having to rethink the way they go to market. In particular, 3 areas were discussed by the participants in terms of creating new fulfillment models and opportunities. First, many firms were focused on improving the balance between the demand and supply sides of their firms, which often have very different objectives and goals. The supply side of the firm is often more focused on efficiently managing resources, whether that's plant capacity, purchasing costs, or inventory, while the demand side of the firm is often more focused on effectively satisfying customers by offering a variety of products, by offering customization, and improving customer service. Finding a balance across these different objectives often involves restructuring the organization or developing cross-organizational processes such as sales and operations planning processes, or S&OP. One of the challenges firms often face in how to connect various functions across the firm is the ability to share the right information. So many firms were undertaking efforts to improve information visibility. In some cases, this involved the implementation of ERP systems. In some cases, it involved new means for analyzing information, such as business analytics. Or in other cases, it involved standardizing information platforms across the firm. A third part of new fulfillment models often means streamlining and standardizing processes to help firms leverage resources across functions, regions, or globally to reduce duplication and complexity. Further initiatives in this area could be undertaken to improve quality, reduce cost, enable data synchronization. Finally, many firms talked about rethinking the firm's global footprint. For example, low-cost country sourcing or nearshoring, as well as better asset utilization from rethinking insourcing versus outsourcing strategies. I'll be sharing a few comments in each of these areas, and then Tom will discuss some of the activities that VF has been undertaking in approaching new fulfillment models. One of the challenges of balancing supply and demand is overcoming the natural differences in objectives that each side has. When we don't have balance, we end up with excess inventories, lower service levels, and reduced profit margins. One thing that companies can do to improve balance across both sides is to change organization structures. And that's what this first quote talks about. In this company, they created a centralized command center that acted as an internal consulting group to offer support to the various regions and manufacturing facilities around the globe. One of the key things that this central command center did was focus on common problems that affected facilities and regions and look to solve those problems. They also focused on sharing best practices across the company. This resulted in about $24 million in net income value being added to the firm. In other cases, firms don't necessarily change organization structure, but they improve cross-functional coordination. In this example, the firm created a cross-functional team focused specifically to work on indirect spend. The team involved representatives from every function: sales, marketing, IT, HR, finance, and they looked for ways to leverage spend across those groups. They looked for ways to change sourcing strategy to improve quality, as well as to leverage in a negotiation standpoint. They budgeted or targeted $1 million in improvement, and the actual results, they ended up achieving a reduction of $6 million. And sometimes those things can be a challenge, as we see in this slide. There's a lot we can do to improve, in particular understanding each other's worlds a little bit better. But oftentimes it's always supply chain's fault no matter what. And I think kind of a good example there, we've got to have thick skin. But we can do more by collaborating, whether it's in this company's case an S&OP process or a integrated business planning, IBP process. The goal is to create projects where we can jointly work together across that supply and demand side to improve value to the company. In this example, they created a supply chain alignment group, and that alignment group has responsibility for reaching out to the customer side so that they really understand what's going on with the customer supply chain teams and liaisoning that information back to the supply chain. So pretty massive efforts from this company trying to improve the demand plan by getting better inputs from key customers, and that way being able to respond more effectively on the supply chain side because we have better information driving the demand decisions in the first place. As information technology improves and costs decline, companies are seeking ways to create more common, standardized information systems that provide greater visibility for better overall decision making. One company mentioned the need to overcome over 30 different systems in place that often could not be synchronized to readily talk to each other. That required supply chain managers to sort through an incredible amount of data that needed to be converted to improve knowledge and make better decisions. Improving information visibility generally takes not only significant investments in technology across various platforms, for example, enabling people to communicate on laptops as well as mobile devices, but also requires an investment in human resources to develop highly capable employees who understand business processes well and are tech savvy. We hear a lot about big data and the potential that it might offer to help us make better decisions, but until we overcome some of this data synchronization or the inability to synchronize data across units and regions, we may have trouble really implementing the idea of big data effectively. I think this quote is a good example where it says, we're talking about big data, but my BlackBerry won't talk to your dictaphone. And so until we're all on that same IT system, we're going to be challenged to make these things work. And a lot of it comes down to how we get transparency. For this company, transparency meant how we can very quickly, very simply pinpoint at the exact time where all their product is. And challenged with how to gain that visibility, particularly when we're in a growth through merger and acquisition, where the different units that we've acquired are on different technology platforms. We've got to be able to have those technology platforms talk to each other, or we've got to convert them to the same technology platform to be able to get this type of transparency. To extend on that discussion, it's not just in the IT realm where we need to streamline and standardize our processes. As we've increased in complexity, trying to satisfy different consumers across the globe, we have to look for ways to simplify and standardize those processes to enable firms to ensure consistent metrics, terminology, and processes are used across the organization. In this company in particular, they were looking for ways to really value chain their supply. And what that meant is looking at the various touch points that were redundant and eliminating them, or looking at simplifying the overall process to increase value and reduce cost. I think many of the companies expressed similar to this quote, we need to simplify everything, whether it's IT processes, whether it's the way people work, and in particular getting global standards. One of the big impacts that this company had was to do a complete footprint rationalization across the globe. They had had a bunch of acquisitions, they had had some additions of some new businesses, and they really had not looked for ways to leverage across those to, for example, share warehouses or utilize, consolidate transportation. And through that footprint rationalization, they were able to significantly reduce cost as well as improve service because the acquisitions had created a footprint that was just unwieldy. Finally, in this particular company, they again were looking for global standards and realized that the way they talked and even what they measured was different across their different sites. So they identified 3 to 6 core processes that each site had to go through, and they looked to create commonization and standardization around those core processes. That meant that they had consistent measures around them, that they had easier ways to communicate performance across those different sites, because all the processes were finally being done in the same way, measured in the same way, and it significantly improved the firm's operations. And now I'll turn things over to Tom again. He'll be talking about the new fulfillment models that VF has been incorporating.
For many years, VF has been a wholesale company, but over the last 10 years or so, we've become much more of what we call a direct-to-consumer company, opening up our own stores, opening up our own websites. In fact, today, over 25% of our business is conducted in what we call a direct-to-consumer channel. As a wholesaler, we had a different distribution and logistics network. One is we emphasized very carefully what the cost per unit was. I'm sure you guys out there also will work on that. And we also built very big boxes that were optimized for a wholesale network. So for example, about 10 years ago, we built about a 1 million square foot distribution center out in California, which supplied some of our key outdoor businesses. That made sense because the goods were predominantly made in Asia, and it was a short trip from the port to that particular facility. Fast forward to today, though, when we have many of our own stores, and for outdoor products, 2 things we basically need to be successful are cold weather and people. And in the United States, most cold weather and people live in the Northeast, from Chicago over to New York, and Midwest, I would say Midwest and Northeast, from Chicago over to New York, and then from Boston maybe down to Raleigh, North Carolina. And we looked at where our warehouse was set up, and we decided that we needed a new optimized distribution logistics network. We have many distribution centers around the country. In fact, we probably have about 30 in the United States. But generally, they were focused on one individual brand. So for the last number of years, the last few years or so, we put together our product flow fulfillment strategies, where we're trying to make all of our distribution centers interoperable. We were working to try to position inventory in multiple locations around the country so that we can satisfy both retail and e-com demand in a much quicker way. I mean, realistically now, with the competition we're getting from companies like Amazon and other, online oligopolists who are giving very quick service, if we maintain just a West Coast or an East Coast distribution network, we were not going to be able to optimize. So we're beginning to put inventory in many of our facilities around the country. And then also we're looking at ways to advance our product flow capabilities and working with logistics companies. So we hope in the future that when our DCs will be much more focused as fulfillment centers, which focus on driving sales, rather than centers that are focused more on taking cost out in CPU. And we've begun that journey, and we think we'll be very successful in the next number of years of getting that done.
Thank you, Tom. We hope that you've enjoyed hearing about the 3 key initiatives that firms in the Beyond the Horizon Research Project have been undertaking, and in particular to hear in more detail from Tom what VF Corporation has been doing in each of those areas as well. It's clear that our firms will continue to need to be change ready, requiring us to think differently about where future demand will be and how our supply chains will support that new growth, how we will create a supply chain to meet future demands, and how we'll be much more involved with our supply base in co-creating and extending that value, as well as rethinking our go-to-market strategies with new fulfillment models. We appreciate your time and certainly appreciate Tom's willingness to participate with us and talk in more detail about VF Corporation and what it's been doing to respond to today's challenges and opportunities. If you're interested in participating in the research or getting additional information about the Beyond the Horizons Research Project, please feel free to email us at the email address provided. We reviewed the results of the in-depth interviews in today's webinar. We're also in the process of collecting survey data and more in-depth case studies from firms, and we will be providing information about that in the future. We also have hosted some roundtable discussions that have enabled us to share in more detail the research results as well.
Great, thank you so much, Judy and Tom. And now we see some time for questions and answers. As a reminder, type your question in the questions box at the right-hand side of your screen and click send. We'll now give you a few moments to send in your questions. Okay, great. Tom, I think our first question is for you. James asking, when it appears that your company is run by people who are more interested in short-term gains, how can you convince them to work with suppliers to develop that relationship where you get more than low-cost items? This is particularly common today in the work environment where people tend to change jobs every few years and aren't around long enough to see the long-term changes.
It's always a challenge for any business about balancing the long and short term. I think the way that I generally approach it is I try to develop long-term strategic work in advance and get senior management involved and engaged in your strategy. That's one of the things that we do. So if we say these are the type of countries or plants we want to get after, this is the type of investment we are going to need, and these are the paybacks. It's before that even that tactical investment question comes up, or before you're actually ready to make that investment. It's kind of getting that agreement in advance that this is where we're going to take the business. And then when you are ready to make an investment and kind of work on the short versus long-term balance, I think it's really critical to put together a strong business case, generally based in the math. There can also be tangible and intangible benefits, but we're driven by shareholder value. So what is the value? And I think it's very important to put together that business case. And I think the other thing is just to be persistent. Sometimes it takes people time to jump onto your ideas, and you might have to expose them a number of different times. So I think if you put it in a strategic framework, have a really good business case, and just be persistent about building that case, I think most good firms over the course of time will make the right investment. They may not do it on the timetable that's most efficient, but if you have a great idea, generally that would work. That's been my experience.
Thanks, Tom. Judy, do you want to add to that?
Sure, and also kind of along those same lines, I think one of the key things is doing that supplier segmentation. And Tom, you talked about the segmentation of the transactional versus the third way business. I think a lot of times if we can show that we have a segment of our supply base that we really have to treat more strategically, and then those short-term gains maybe fall on that more transactional segment of supply base where we have the ability to do some leveraging of spend, but then we go to those strategies that Tom just talked about with that strategic group and really focus more on how it contributes to the long-term strategy of the firm.
Great, thanks Judy. So I'll pass our next question back to Tom, and then Judy, you can add more if you'd like. This question comes from Brian, and Brian asks, what sort of recommendations do you have for a smaller size company without resources to strategically source materials from overseas?
You know, that can be always tricky. I think one of the things that people do is look for partners. You know, in some cases that would require, in Asia, it might require to have an agent. Sometimes you pay a bit more, but they have a large network of various resources that you can use, so that might be one recommendation. Another one is to be very focused on what your needs are. Even if some firms are very flexible, and if you can find the right partner, small or big, they'll satisfy your need. I'm not sure I have any other, you know, really great answers on that. But those would be just my, you know, suggestions and thinking about it just for a minute or two.
I think one other comment, and maybe Tom, this is another option for you to jump in as well. You talked a lot about relying, part of your supply base being Mexico and Central America. You know, another option for a small company might be not thinking about completely offshoring to Asia, but looking for opportunities in near source or near shore regions as another option.
That's a good point. That's one of the things that would make sense, is you can find suppliers nearby, or in some cases there are people who will act on your behalf who are in a domestic environment and then have a network that you can rely on and go and ask them to help you out with that type of work. So similar things. If it's not Asia, there's people who have potentially have an office here in the U.S. that could help.
Great, thanks guys. Our next question comes from Ryan, and I think this might be a good question for Judy. Going back to the story about the cross-coordination team, could you guys explain in a little more detail how exactly that team reached a savings of $6 million when the goal was only $1 million?
Sure. And I just want to talk about that. That was one of the companies in the research, because the question was kind of directed more at VF and that $6 million. So that was a different company that participated in our research project. I think one of the things that company found is they really underestimated, when they were coming up with that initial 1 million target, they really underestimated how decentralized the company was in terms of procurement of indirect, and different functional areas were all kind of off on their own doing different things. And so that cross-functional team getting put together, they realized, for example, that maybe 3 different plants were buying from the same MRO supplier, but each one was contracting with that MRO supplier on their own. Each one was getting different pricing, and so they were able to leverage some of the spend. And I think part of it was they maybe had, they didn't realize how much opportunity was out there when they targeted that 1 million. But that $6 million came pretty quickly over about 18 month to 2-year period, where they really looked at all the different activities companies that they were doing across those functions, how to leverage, but also best practices. So maybe what they might be doing on an IT side in one region, they were not doing in another, or decisions they were making for how to manage indirect inventory or indirect spend in one area they were not using in another. So it was a mix of consolidating effort better, leveraging spend, reducing duplicate suppliers that maybe that redundancy wasn't warranted, and then also sharing best practices.
Great, thanks Judy. I think our next question is for Tom. Tom, Athanasia wants to know more about some of the processes VF incorporated to improve communications and interaction with your suppliers, and how you track whether they're performance is aligning with your business strategies. So could you talk more about that and how long it took to implement some of those processes?
Okay, sure. We do it a number of different ways. One of the things that we do at the very senior level is we have supplier summits. It can be, depending on what's going on in our business, frequent and infrequent. Sometimes I will actually participate in those, or other senior executives, so we can brief them on what is going on with VF and what our strategies are. Then there's, within most of our businesses with our key suppliers, there's a key executive who owns that relationship. They're obviously meeting with them directly frequently. We've also done a tremendous amount of the work over the last few years on vendor scorecarding, and that will relate to on-time delivery, quality performance, ability to produce products that we need, product development, etc. And we'll share that with them and share how their peer group companies are doing, so they have a sense of where they need to improve. And I would say that those are probably nothing really enormously maybe differentiated. I think the key there is to have a disciplined process and continue to follow up on it. And I think one of the things that we've done well, the teams have done well, is they've measured better. And when you have better measurement, that guides you with the facts. And if you can bring facts to a supplier, they'll act much more accordingly than anecdotal, you need to do this better, need to do this better. But if you bring the facts before them and how it affects your business, it tends to be very effective.
Great, thanks so much, Tom. And I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to pass this one over to you, Judy. Robert asks, what advice can you give to a student entering college for supply chain management?
Great question. Well, first of all, I congratulate you on entering in supply chain management. We certainly continue to hear from companies that recruit with us about a great talent shortage. They're not able to find at all levels, whether it's entry level versus executive level, they're not able to find the talent that they need. I think a big issue for you will be really embracing the classes, getting to know faculty, finding out what kind of research they're working on so that you're staying on the leading edge of what's happening in the field. Great publications out there from trade associations like APICS and others where you can become a student member. You can attend local chapter meetings to get to know folks in the area of the university you'll be attending. You can network. Those trade associations offer a lot of free resources online and hard print. And then working with great companies like VF and others where you can have a great internship experience. And we're finding many companies starting that internship right after the freshman year. And so you're looking to graduate with 2, maybe 3 or more internship opportunities so that you get a sense of some of the areas of supply chain that you like and want to start that career off with. And then I think continuing your education process. There was another question on how do you continue that education process after the degree. So certainly, again, participating in trade associations, getting a certification from an association, going to annual conferences, and then looking for advanced degrees in supply chain, whether it's a MBA with a concentration in supply chain or a Master's of Science in supply chain. I think are all great ways to prepare yourself for success.
Great, thanks, Judy. Now I know we have a lot of more great questions, but we are out of time. So if your question was not answered, you can contact Judy at the information you see on your screen right now, and hopefully we can follow up and get you guys some good answers. Also, I invite you to share your feedback with us through a brief survey that will appear as you exit the webinar. It's only about 5 questions, and any feedback you can offer is always appreciated. And I'd like to thank our presenters for their time today and all of our attendees for participating in this APICS webinar. All content and materials included in this edition of the APICS webinar are the property of APICS and Michigan State University and are protected by the United States and international copyright laws. All rights are reserved. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great day.